In the summer of AD 79, the city of Pompeii was alive. The streets were crowded with people moving between shops, workshops, taverns, baths, temples, and houses. Bakers prepared bread. Merchants argued over prices. Animals were led through narrow streets. Children played in courtyards. Slaves carried water and goods. Wealthy families received guests beneath painted walls, while workers opened their businesses for another ordinary day. Beyond the city stood Mount Vesuvius. For generations, the mountain had been part of the landscape. It was familiar. It was simply there, rising above the Bay of Naples. Few people understood what it really was. Vesuvius had not erupted for centuries. To the people living around it, the mountain did not look like a threat. Its slopes were fertile. Its vineyards produced excellent wine. Its surrounding countryside was beautiful. The people of Pompeii had learned to live beside the mountain. They did not know that the mountain was waiting. On the morning of August 24th, AD 79, the city began as it always did. The sun rose over Campania. The streets gradually filled. A baker entered his shop. A merchant opened his doors. Workers carried baskets and tools. In wealthy homes, servants prepared food. At the forum, people gathered to conduct business and discuss politics. There was nothing about the morning that suggested the day would become one of the most famous disasters in ancient history. Then the mountain changed. A violent explosion tore through the summit of Vesuvius. The sound must have been enormous. A column of ash and volcanic material shot into the sky. For miles around, the landscape was transformed. People looked upward. At first, many probably did not understand what they were seeing. A strange cloud rose above the mountain, growing higher and wider. It spread across the sky like an enormous tree. Dark material climbed upward before spreading horizontally. The sun began to disappear. Ash began falling. At first, the falling material may have seemed strange rather than terrifying. People had experienced earthquakes before. Campania was a region of seismic activity. The residents of Pompeii had felt tremors in their lifetime. 17 years earlier, a powerful earthquake had damaged Pompeii and surrounding towns. Many buildings were still being repaired. Some temples had not been completely restored. Walls carried cracks. Houses showed evidence of unfinished construction. The people knew the ground could shake, but they did not know that an earthquake had been a warning. The eruption grew stronger. Ash and pumice began falling heavily. Roofs became covered. Streets disappeared beneath a growing layer of volcanic debris. People began to realize that something extraordinary was happening. Some fled immediately. Others stayed. That decision would determine who survived. Pompeii was not instantly destroyed. This is one of the most important things to understand about the disaster. There was time. Hours passed. The city received warning after warning. The sky became darker. The air became harder to breathe. Pumice stones fell from above. Some were small. Others were large enough to injure or kill. People attempted to escape through the streets. Some carried children. Some carried money. Some carried food. Some carried religious objects. Some carried nothing at all. They simply ran. The roads leading away from Pompeii became crowded. People tried to move toward the coast. Others sought shelter inside buildings. The city became a place of confusion. No government could stop the eruption. No army could fight the mountain. There was no modern understanding of volcanoes. No warning system. No emergency services. No scientific explanation. People could only react. And while Pompeii struggled, another Roman settlement was watching the same disaster. Across the Bay of Naples stood Misenum. There, the Roman fleet was stationed. The commander of the fleet was Pliny the Elder. He was more than a military officer. He was a writer, scholar, administrator, and one of the most intellectually curious men in the Roman world. When he saw the enormous cloud rising from Vesuvius, he became interested. He wanted to understand what was happening. But then he learned that people were in danger. Pliny ordered ships to prepare. He was not simply trying to escape. He wanted to help. The Roman fleet crossed the bay. As the ships approached the affected coastline, the conditions became increasingly dangerous. Ash filled the air. The sea became difficult to navigate. The sky darkened. Pliny reached Stabii, where he attempted to organize evacuations and provide assistance. He continued observing the eruption. His nephew, Pliny the Younger, was at Misenum. Years later, he would write letters describing what he had seen. His account would become one of the most important eyewitness sources for the eruption. He described the enormous cloud rising from Vesuvius. It looked, he said, like a pine tree. Its trunk rose high into the sky before spreading outward. The image has survived for almost 2,000 years. Modern scientists even use the term Plinian eruption to describe explosive volcanic eruptions of this type. But while Pliny observed the disaster, Pompeii was being buried. The falling pumice became deeper. Buildings began to collapse. People trapped inside homes struggled to breathe. Some tried to protect themselves with cloth. Others moved to upper floors. Others went underground. But there was no safe place for long. The volcanic material continued falling. The city was disappearing. Streets became buried. Doors were blocked. Windows vanished beneath ash. Roofs collapsed under the weight. People who had stayed inside buildings began to realize that shelter could become a trap. They needed to escape. But escape routes were disappearing. The eruption continued through the night. Pompeii was no longer recognizable. A city that had existed for centuries was being transformed into a landscape of ash. Yet the worst was still coming. Volcanic eruptions do not only produce ash. They can produce pyroclastic flows. These are extremely hot mixtures of gas, ash, and volcanic material that move rapidly down the slopes of a volcano. They are deadly. They can travel faster than a person can run. They can overwhelm buildings. They can destroy everything in their path. During the eruption of Vesuvius, these flows eventually reached the settlements around the volcano. For the people of Pompeii, the final phase came suddenly. The first major surge swept across the region. The temperature was immense. The hot cloud moved through streets and buildings. People who had survived the falling pumice now faced something they could not outrun. Some victims died almost instantly. Others were buried beneath layers of volcanic material. The city became sealed. Pompeii disappeared. Nearby Herculaneum suffered an even more violent fate. The city was overwhelmed by pyroclastic material. Buildings were buried. Wooden structures were preserved. Objects that would normally have decayed survived because they were sealed away from oxygen. For centuries, the cities would remain hidden. Above them, life continued. The Roman Empire continued. Emperors ruled. Armies marched. Wars were fought. New cities were built. Generations were born and died. The people of Rome moved on. But beneath the ground, Pompeii remained. Its streets were frozen beneath volcanic deposits. Its houses remained. Its shops remained. Its walls remained. And, extraordinarily, traces of the people remained. The disaster preserved details of ordinary Roman life that would otherwise have disappeared forever. This is why Pompeii matters so much. The city did not only preserve a catastrophe, it preserved a moment. Ancient history is often dominated by emperors, generals, battles, and political events. But Pompeii gives us something different. It shows us ordinary people. We can see where they lived. We can see what they ate. We can see what they painted on their walls. We can see the tools they used. We can see their shops. We can see their streets. We can see graffiti written by people who lived almost 2,000 years ago. A person could walk through Pompeii and encounter the remains of a bakery. There are ovens. There are grinding stones. There are storage containers. The ancient city suddenly becomes understandable. Bread was not an abstract part of Roman life. Someone had to grind the grain. Someone had to prepare the dough. Someone had to heat the oven. Someone had to sell the bread. Pompeii preserves that process. The same is true of wine. Campania was famous for vineyards. Wine was stored in large containers. Taverns served drinks. People met, talked, argued, and ate. Some establishments were simple. Others belonged to wealthy households. Roman society was deeply unequal. Some residents lived in enormous houses with gardens, fountains, and decorated rooms. Others lived in much smaller spaces. Slaves were everywhere. They worked in homes, shops, farms, kitchens, and workshops. Pompeii reveals this social structure without requiring us to imagine it from a distant historical account. It is physically present. The houses tell the story. One of the most remarkable features of Pompeii is its painted decoration. Walls were covered with colorful images. Some depicted gods and heroes. Others showed landscapes. Others showed theatrical scenes. There were images of food, animals, architecture, and mythology. The Romans did not think of walls as empty surfaces. They used them to display wealth, taste, identity, and imagination. A wealthy homeowner could enter a room surrounded by painted scenes inspired by Greek mythology. A visitor might see Venus, Mars, Apollo, Dionysus, or scenes from famous stories. The walls transformed domestic space into a statement about the owner's world. Pompeii also preserves something much more personal. Graffiti. People wrote on walls. They left advertisements. They wrote political messages. They expressed affection. They insulted enemies. They announced gladiatorial events. They recorded names. They joked. They argued. The walls of Pompeii remind us that ancient people were not silent. They were human. They complained about neighbors. They promoted candidates. They wrote messages to lovers. They advertised entertainment. They left behind the same mixture of serious and ridiculous thoughts that fills modern cities. One of the most fascinating discoveries was the enormous amount of political graffiti. Pompeii had elections. Candidates competed for public office. Supporters wrote recommendations on walls. The city was politically active. Citizens cared about local government. This means Pompeii was not merely a Roman town waiting to be destroyed. It was a functioning community. People had plans. Businesses had customers. Candidates expected elections. Families expected the future. Children were growing up. Workers expected to return home. No one woke that morning believing that their city would disappear. That is what makes the tragedy so powerful. Disasters are often frightening because they interrupt ordinary life without permission. A person can be planning tomorrow when tomorrow suddenly stops existing. In Pompeii, the future was erased. The people who fled did not know whether they would return. Those who stayed may have believed the eruption would eventually stop. Perhaps some expected the ash to clear. Perhaps they had seen earthquakes before and assumed that this would become another memory. The human mind has difficulty accepting an event that has never happened before. People compare the unknown with the familiar. And sometimes the comparison is wrong. The eruption continued. Night fell. The sky remained dark. The ground shook. Buildings collapsed. Ash covered everything. The Roman world around Pompeii could not understand the scale of what was happening. The disaster was local, but its consequences were enormous. Pliny the Elder died at Stabii. According to his nephew, he attempted to help others and was eventually overcome by the volcanic gases and conditions. His death became part of the story of the eruption. His nephew survived. Pliny the Younger later described the disaster in letters to the historian Tacitus. Those letters became crucial evidence for modern historians. Without them, much of what we know about the eruption would be based only on archaeology. The letters give us a human perspective. A young man watched the sky change. He watched people panic. He saw the darkness. He described the fear of people around him. His account preserved the experience of those hours. But even Pliny could not have known what the future would do with Pompeii. After the eruption, the city was abandoned. Survivors returned in search of valuables. Some attempted to recover possessions. They dug through the volcanic deposits. They removed objects. But the city was effectively gone. The Roman government did not rebuild Pompeii as it had been. The survivors moved elsewhere. Nature covered the remains. Plants grew over the deposits. Centuries passed. The Roman Empire itself eventually disappeared from the Western Mediterranean. New kingdoms rose. Old roads fell into disuse. Languages changed. Christianity spread. Empires came and went. The location of Pompeii faded from memory. The buried city became a secret beneath the ground. Then, many centuries later, people began finding traces. Exploration became more systematic. Excavations revealed streets, walls, temples, houses, shops, public buildings. And the world suddenly discovered that an entire Roman city had survived beneath the earth. The discovery changed archaeology. Instead of studying only fragments, historians could study a complete urban environment. Pompeii became a window into daily Roman life. The streets revealed how cities were organized. The houses revealed family life. The shops revealed commerce. The temples revealed religion. The graffiti revealed ordinary voices. The preserved food revealed diet. The tools revealed work. The paintings revealed art. The disaster had accidentally created an archaeological time capsule. But the discovery also raised uncomfortable questions. What should happen to a city preserved because thousands of people died there? How should archaeologists treat human remains? How should modern visitors behave in places where ancient families lost their lives? Pompeii is both a scientific treasure and a cemetery. Every street has a history. Every house belonged to someone. Every object had a purpose. Every preserved body represents a person who had a name, a family, and a life. The victims were not symbols. They were individuals. Some were wealthy. Some were poor. Some were enslaved. Some were children. Some were elderly. Some were trying to escape. Some stayed behind. Their final moments were different, but their lives had one thing in common. They had expected another day. That is the detail that makes Pompeii more than a historical curiosity. The city reminds us how fragile ordinary life can be. The Romans who lived there did not think of themselves as ancient. They did not know they were living in history. They woke up, worked, ate, argued, laughed, worshipped, traded, and planned for the future. Their world felt normal. And then the mountain erupted. This is why walking through Pompeii can feel strangely intimate. A modern visitor can stand inside a Roman house and see a room that has not changed its basic shape in nearly 2,000 years. A doorway is still there. A courtyard is still there. A painted wall is still there. A bakery is still there. The streets still follow their ancient paths. The stones still bear the marks of carts. The city feels abandoned rather than destroyed. It is as though everyone simply walked away. But they did not. They were caught in a disaster so powerful that it erased their world while preserving its outline. The eruption also changed the history of volcano science. The observations recorded by Pliny the Younger helped future scientists understand explosive eruptions. The term Plinian became associated with eruptions that produce enormous columns of volcanic material. Modern volcanologists study Vesuvius because it remains active. The mountain is no longer an unknown. Its history is understood. Its geological structure is studied. Its dangers are monitored. Millions of people live in the surrounding region today. The modern world possesses technologies that the Romans could never have imagined. Satellites can observe volcanic activity. Sensors can detect changes. Scientists can model eruptions. Emergency planners can create evacuation zones. Yet one fundamental truth remains unchanged. A volcano is more powerful than a city. Pompeii was not destroyed because its people were foolish. They simply did not possess the knowledge that modern society has. They did not know exactly what Vesuvius was capable of. Their civilization was advanced in many ways, but their understanding of geology was limited. The Roman Empire could build roads across mountains. It could construct aqueducts. It could organize armies of tens of thousands of soldiers. It could build amphitheaters capable of holding enormous crowds. It could administer territories across 3 continents. But it could not stop Vesuvius. That contrast tells us something important about ancient civilization. Technology does not mean complete control over nature. The Romans were powerful. Nature was more powerful. And on that day in AD 79, the balance became obvious. The people of Pompeii disappeared, but their city survived in a strange form. The destruction became preservation. The catastrophe became evidence. The dead became witnesses. The buried streets became a historical record. And the ordinary details of life became more valuable than the Romans could ever have imagined. Consider a loaf of bread. A baker made it before the eruption. The bread was not important. It was breakfast. It was business. It was ordinary. But because the city was buried, the remains of food could survive. Consider a painted wall. Someone paid a painter to decorate a room. The owner probably enjoyed it every day. The painter never imagined that people thousands of years later would study the work. Consider graffiti. Someone scratched words onto a wall. Perhaps they expected it to be erased. Instead, it survived. Consider a cup. Someone drank from it. Perhaps wine. Perhaps water. Then the city disappeared. The object remained. History is often preserved by accidents. Pompeii is one of the greatest examples. The tragedy froze details that would normally disappear. Most ancient cities did not survive this way. They were rebuilt. Their streets changed. Old houses were demolished. New buildings rose over them. Their objects were reused. Their walls were destroyed. Their inhabitants left. Pompeii was different. The eruption created a layer that separated one world from the next. That layer became a barrier between ancient life and modern archaeology. When excavators opened the city, they were not merely finding ruins. They were uncovering a moment. That moment contains contradictions. There is beauty in the paintings. There is sophistication in the architecture. There is evidence of organized government. There are signs of wealth. There are traces of pleasure. There are signs of violence and inequality. There are reminders of slavery. And beneath all of it is death. Pompeii cannot be reduced to a beautiful Roman city. It was a complex society. Its people lived within an empire built through conquest. They benefited from Roman infrastructure. They participated in Roman culture. They also lived within a world of social hierarchy. The city therefore gives us both sides of Roman civilization, its brilliance and its brutality. That is why Pompeii remains important. It allows us to see Rome without the distance created by emperors and battles. Instead of asking which emperor won a war, we can ask what a Roman family ate for dinner. Instead of asking which general commanded a legion, we can see the workshop of a craftsman. Instead of reading about Roman wealth, we can stand inside a decorated house. Instead of reading that Romans enjoyed public entertainment, we can see the amphitheater. The city makes history physical, and perhaps that is the greatest legacy of the disaster. Vesuvius destroyed Pompeii, but it also preserved Pompeii. Without the eruption, the city might have changed over centuries. Its houses might have been rebuilt. Its paintings might have disappeared. Its streets might have been replaced. Its graffiti might have been erased. Its objects might have been reused. Its people would have become ancestors forgotten by history. Instead, the eruption created a strange bridge between their world and ours. 2,000 years later, we can still see evidence of their lives. The final day of Pompeii, therefore, has two stories. The first is a story of destruction. A mountain erupts. A city is buried. Thousands of people die. The second is a story of preservation. A city disappears. Centuries pass. Then humanity uncovers it. The destruction that ended Pompeii created the evidence that allows us to understand it. That paradox is at the heart of the city's history. On the morning before the eruption, Pompeii was simply a Roman city. People complained about prices. Merchants negotiated. Children played. Workers worked. Families ate. Citizens voted. Priests performed rituals. The rich displayed their wealth. The poor struggled to survive. People fell in love. People argued. People planned tomorrow. Then Vesuvius erupted. By the end of the disaster, the city was gone. But not completely. Under the ash, Pompeii waited. It waited through the fall of Rome. It waited through the Middle Ages. It waited through wars, kingdoms, and changing civilizations. It waited until archaeologists began to uncover its streets. And when the city finally returned to the human world, it brought its people with it. Not alive, not able to speak, but present in the objects they left behind. A city can disappear. A civilization can disappear. A person's name can disappear. But sometimes, the smallest details survive. A footprint, a painted flower, a scratched sentence, a cooking pot, a loaf of bread, a child's toy, a broken cup, a wall, a doorway, a street. These details allow the dead to become visible again. That is why the final day of Pompeii remains one of the most haunting events in Roman history. It was not simply the day a volcano destroyed a city. It was the day an ordinary world ended without knowing that it was becoming history. The people of Pompeii did not know their last morning was their last morning. They did not know their homes would become archaeological sites. They did not know strangers thousands of years later would walk through their streets. They did not know their graffiti would survive. They did not know their possessions would become museum pieces. They did not know that the mountain they had lived beside would preserve their lives better than almost any other Roman city. They simply lived. And then the mountain erupted. Today, Vesuvius still stands above the Bay of Naples. The same landscape that once surrounded Pompeii remains recognizable. The mountain is green. The bay is blue. The cities around it are alive. Roads carry modern traffic. People work. Children go to school. Families eat dinner. Visitors arrive to see the ruins. Life continues beneath the same volcano. That is perhaps the final image to remember. Pompeii was destroyed in a single catastrophic eruption. But the world did not end. The survivors continued. Rome continued. The empire continued. History continued. Only one city was stopped in time. And because it was stopped, we can still hear something from the people who lived there. Not their voices, not their stories told directly, but the evidence of ordinary life. The streets they walked, the rooms they entered, the tools they held, the words they wrote, the food they prepared, the homes they loved. For a brief moment in AD 79, the ordinary life of a Roman city was interrupted by one of nature's most powerful forces. The mountain won. Pompeii vanished. But nearly 2,000 years later, it returned. And when it returned, it gave the modern world something extraordinary. A glimpse of Rome not as an empire of emperors and armies, but as a city full of ordinary people who woke up one morning expecting another normal day. They never received it. But because their city was buried, that ordinary day was never completely lost. Pompeii remained beneath the earth, waiting and waiting, until the world remembered its name.